Hi, this is Dan Sullivan, and today I've got a question from Josh, and he asked about metabolism. So, metabolism, there's a lot to cover, and I'll go through a couple tips that I've got for having a healthy metabolism. Weight management and all that, it's all very related, so I'll go over my best tips for that. So, to start it off, metabolism is controlled by your thyroid, or your basal metabolic rate is determined by your thyroid. So you've probably heard of different thyroid conditions, or hypothyroid and so forth, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and some other ones as well, like Graves' disease, for instance. And so the thyroid is responsible for our basal metabolic rate, right? So that's how we expend energy. And so it's very important to have a well-functioning thyroid. So as I've talked about in the past, it's definitely critical to have blood work done and to get your thyroid numbers checked way beyond just your TSH, okay? So the thyroid needs to be working properly for your metabolism to be functioning optimally. Now, another thing I want to cover is a hormone called leptin. And so leptin is a hormone that controls, or is partly responsible for controlling your hunger, your satiety, and also your weight. So leptin is a big one to understand and to really be able to regulate properly. So a lot of people will have stuff like leptin resistance, where the brain no longer responds to leptin appropriately, and so it doesn't send the signal, and then it basically can interact with your thyroid and give you hypothyroid-like symptoms. So, not having the metabolism that you once did and having trouble losing weight, typical hypothyroid-like symptoms. So leptin is a big one to get under control. And so there's a couple things that lead to leptin resistance. Number one is going to be eating too much. So this essentially, like having too much of anything, right? Like having too much caffeine, eventually your brain just stops getting the signal, right? It just kind of is bombarded with that caffeine day in and day out, and then eventually it stops responding as appropriately as it once did. So now it takes you 3 or 4 cups of coffee to feel that same effect that you once only had to drink a cup of coffee to feel. So it's sort of the same way that leptin does that in the brain. So overeating is definitely critical to stop doing if you're worried about your metabolism and correcting any sort of leptin resistance. And so, as Ben Lynch just says in his book Dirty Genes, stop eating when you're about 80% full. So that's a great rule of thumb to go by. And then I'll talk about some foods that help us to feel full as well in a little bit. So leptin resistance basically tells the hypothalamus to secrete less thyroid hormone. So as you probably know, or maybe you're aware of, but there's a really interesting communication between the brain, so the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the thyroid. And so what happens is when you have leptin resistance, there's a communication malfunction in there. It's sort of like when you have a cell phone and you're losing signal, right? It's spotty, it's not very good, and so there's a lack of communication there, and it's not very effective, right? So we definitely want to clean that up. And so a couple of tips for resolving that and also resolving your metabolism are going to be to stop eating at least up to about 3 hours before bed, right? So this is going to help to regulate your circadian rhythm as well, and it's going to give your organs a rest, because it takes a lot of energy on your liver, your guts, to process food. And so what happens is if you're eating right before bed, it's going to take a lot of energy, and you'll probably wake up the next morning feeling a little bit more tired and fatigued. And so a good rule of thumb is to stop eating about 1, 2, or even 3 hours before you go to bed, right? Calorie restriction is a big one that a lot of people will do. Say, I want to increase my metabolism, I want to lose some weight, right? Traditionally speaking, we're told to exercise more and then reduce the amount of calories that we consume. This may work in the short term, however, there are potential ramifications of that. So when you do that chronically, the body will then reduce its basal metabolic rate because it thinks it's in a starvation mode, and so stress can go up, cortisol can go up, and a lot of other compensatory mechanisms are upregulated basically because your body thinks it's starving, so everything sort of slows down, your metabolism slows down, and your body wants to hold on to its fat storages because it thinks you're starving essentially. And so that's something that I would not recommend, and you can definitely lose weight and regulate your metabolism without starving yourself, so don't think you have to do that. Another thing that a lot of people will be is dehydrated, right, from either consuming way too many caffeinated beverages because of what I said earlier about, you know, them drinking a couple coffees a day, and then slowly over time they need more and more, and so that caffeine is a diuretic, and that can definitely dehydrate you. So what a normal rule of thumb is, what I tell clients, is to drink about half of your body weight in ounces. So for me, I'm a little bit over 200 pounds, and so that means about 100 ounces of preferably filtered water, filtered for fluorine, or fluoride, I'm sorry, and some other chemicals as well. So hopefully you're getting clean water for those however many ounces it is. So again, about a half of your body weight in ounces is a good rule of thumb. So when you're dehydrated, the body likes to hold on to things too. Similar to if you're in a caloric restriction, it'll end up holding on to fat as well. Lack of sleep is another big one that a lot of people deal with, and so that can do the same exact thing. Your body will hold on to things, it'll become more stressed, and so you definitely want to be getting proper sleep. And I've talked about sleep hygiene in the past, you know, blocking out your windows, going to bed roughly, you know, anywhere between, you know, 9:30, 10, 11. Don't want to be going to bed much later than that on a consistent basis because that can mess with your circadian rhythm as well, and that can have some deleterious effects. So another one is going to be fructose and sugar consumption. So these ones lead to a variety of different problems, and so I don't want to go into those in too much depth right now, but definitely limiting your amount of sugars that you're consuming for a variety of reasons, not just metabolism and leptin, but a whole host of other issues can be affected there. High stress levels as well. Sorry, the video cut out there. I just ran out of room on my phone recording, so I was just getting into stress, and so having high stress levels. So stress and high stress can give you too much cortisol release, you know, similar to like a very high caffeine drink. It's not a good idea to be having chronically high cortisol levels. We're meant to have short bursts of stress and then sort of a downtime or a period of relaxation to recharge the system. So if we're chronically in fight or flight, I've probably talked about that in past videos, that's not a good idea to be in fight or flight all the time. Right, so you need that balance of that sympathetic, the fight or flight, and then the rest and digest, or the parasympathetic nervous system activity. So having high cortisol or high stress can definitely get your metabolism out of whack, increase inflammation, and then cause a cascade of health problems. So you definitely don't want to go there. And then last but not least is time-restricted eating. So there's a lot of really interesting research coming out about time-restricted eating, and also some intermittent fasting as well. So this can be slightly stressful on the body, so you definitely want to be starting slow here, especially if you have chronic health conditions. You know, definitely talk with your doctor before employing any of these techniques, but for most of the population you should be fine with a minimal time-restricted eating. And what I mean by that is basically having a little bit of a longer time period between dinner and then breakfast the next morning. And so the point of that is basically to give your organs a rest from digesting food. So like I said earlier, you definitely want to be stopping eating about 1 to 3 hours before you go to bed, and then having a little bit of a later breakfast. And again, you can start slow. You don't have to starve yourself again, because that can cause some increased cortisol and some deleterious effects there. So you definitely want to start slow. And so you can start at, like a 12-hour window of not eating, for instance, and then work your way up, or, just stay there. That's fine. But essentially, that's going to give your organs a break and sort of reset the leptin, and reset yourself, and so you can have more energy, have a better metabolism. Because as you probably know, when you're eating all the time, you never give your body a break. And so it's really nice when you give yourself a break from food. It also is really good for creating autophagy, which is basically like cell repair. So the damaged cells get repaired and get rejuvenated or get discarded during that process of autophagy. That's really, really upregulated by intermittent fasting or even prolonged fasting. I don't want to get into that right now, but that's definitely a topic for discussion in the future. So that's it for today. I hope hopefully that was helpful. There was a lot of tips there, so if you have any comments or questions, definitely just comment below. I'd be happy to answer those. And as always, thank you for watching.